Hello from Hollywood. My name is Anthony Boyer.
And I'm Jess Canty.
And today on Take Fountain, we're going to talk about audition terminology. During the course of your acting career, you are going to audition a lot. You're going to audition a lot more than you're actually going to film, it is very likely. So one of the things that people struggle with when they first get out to Hollywood, I find, is just knowing the terminology. Would you agree?
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. There's a lot of lingo in the entertainment industry in general, and auditions are no exception.
Yeah. And so there are a few different kinds of ways that auditions are held these days. It used to be you'd get an audition, you'd go there, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you'd fight traffic to get to Santa Monica, you would say your 2 lines and leave. It's changed a lot since then. True. The majority of auditions you do are actually going to be self-taped these days. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the self-tape audition looks like?
Sure, absolutely. So if you're self-taping, there's a couple ways of doing this. You can do it at home with a reader of your choice, a friend, a roommate, a spouse.
Stranger.
A stranger. And we've talked about this in another video, but a simple setup, your, smartphone plus a natural lighting source and a plain wall is enough for a self-tape audition at home. You don't have to get super fancy with it, all the way up to professional photography backdrops. We always recommend that you don't invest in more expensive equipment until your acting business can afford it. So that is the first way of self-taping. You can also tape at a self-tape studio. There's a number of them in town. Most major markets will have self-tape studios where they're going to provide all that equipment for you. They're going to actually even often edit the video for you and send you the link that you can send off to your agent or manager or the casting director directly, depending on how you're getting that audition notification.
Yeah, and so to jump into some of the terminology, there are 2 ways. Obviously, let's say that you're using your phone in particular. You might shoot horizontally or vertically. Would you agree? Unless asked specifically for vertical video, you should shoot horizontally.
100%. The default is horizontal. Quite often you'll see in the instructions, please shoot horizontally. That's what they mean. If you're using an iPhone, they do not want that vertical video aspect ratio. So most theatrical auditions that are self-tape are coming through Breakdown Services / Actors Access, 2 sides of the same company. We've covered that in another video. They have a self-taping service which allows you to upload your tapes directly to EcoCast, that's what it's called, and that gets sent through either to your agent, manager, or sometimes directly to casting. If you see on there, another term you'll see in there is direct submit. Okay. So if it's set to direct submit, that will go straight through to the casting director. If you don't see that, if it says direct submit no, it's going to go to your rep before it gets sent on to the casting director. So Breakdown Services, most likely a theatrical audition. Casting Networks is going to be commercial auditions. They have recently added a function where you can upload videos, your auditions, directly in Casting Networks. That's relatively new. The primary thing is always follow the instructions and ask your rep questions if you don't understand some terminology.
Yeah, exactly. And then the very most important thing about any taped audition, or really any audition at all, do not post it publicly.
Yes.
Never post it publicly. That is something that sometimes it will even violate an NDA. It's always problematic. There's really no benefit to it. Avoid the temptation to post your auditions publicly.
Yeah, I'm going to say it as well, just to emphasize it. Do not ever post your auditions to social media, any other public platform without permission. There are times where after you have booked a role and you actually film that episode or film that movie, and that movie or episode has been released to the public, right, that it is probably okay to, at that point, post it and show, hey, this is the audition for this role I
Even then I would get permission.
But I was going to say, yeah. But you're still going to want to get permission to do that.
Yeah.
You have to remember that the script that you're working off of is copywritten material that you do not own. It is property of the company that paid to have that created and written. So a major studio, a TV network. And that is why we just always say, do not post it, because it is not you don't own that material.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, someone is going to book that job, and someone is going to create that performance under different conditions. And there's no benefit to it. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't post it publicly.
But hold on to your self-tapes, because, when looking for an agent or a manager, if you taped for a large role on something, you got a call back on something that's a very popular show. And that can be a really good way of showing your work, even if you didn't actually book the job. So we encourage you to keep your tapes and keep them organized and labeled, but don't post them to social media.
Don't post them publicly at all, ever. Not so very long ago, we used to do this insane thing where we would transport our bodies to a room where the casting directors would sit, and we would interact in person like humans.
Yeah.
And sometimes that still happens.
Yeah.
We do sometimes still have in-person auditions.
Sometimes the casting office is actually given the budget to be able to rent a space and sit in front of an actor and give them a direction and redirect. If you can tell our tone, it's because we both desperately miss this world. We think that, it's so beneficial for casting and actors to get to know each other in person. We feel for our friends in casting who are now in this world where tape is the norm, and they aren't given the opportunities. Production isn't given
or the budget.
Yeah, the budget and the opportunity to see actors in person. So, this is absolutely not us in any way throwing any shade on casting. It's more that the budgets have shrunk to a place where they aren't allowing for this really important interaction, in our opinion.
Yeah, I think I'm just old.
Yeah.
I'm just like, remember how it used to be? But so sometimes, especially in two specific instances, you may still get an in-person audition. Number one is going to be commercial audition. Many of those are in person. And number two is for theater. Many theater auditions are now in person, or at least have the option of being in person.
Right.
So if I'm Johnny Actor and I've been sending all these self-tapes out into the world, and now someone wants me to go to 200 South La Brea and do a commercial audition, what do I do? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So you definitely want to plan for traffic. You're
going to hit every red light.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You definitely want to, if your audition is at 2:30, in your head, your audition is at 2:15, right? So you definitely want to get there early. It doesn't usually make sense to get there way too early.
No, in fact, you might be in the way. You might be a problem if that happens.
Yeah. So, 10 to 15 minutes from your actual scheduled time is sort of what we recommend, so that you can walk in without feeling rushed. You are likely going to encounter some kind of sign-in sheet. Mm-hmm. This is a requirement from SAG. They have to actually take note of who is coming in and at what time. These days, a lot of times they're digital. They used to be actual paper sign sheets. You will be in a waiting room, likely. Sometimes it is outside of the casting office itself. Sometimes it is within the casting office, and then the actual audition room is a separate space. Sometimes you can hear the audition that is going on with the other people next to you in the waiting room, so be prepared for that. Sometimes you will be in that waiting room and the casting associate or casting assistant is sitting at a desk sort of in front of you. They're tapping away on the computer.
Or in theaters, some sort of monitor.
Yeah. So they're sending out other auditions. They're working, but they know who's in that room, and they may have an ear on what's going on in the waiting room. So we always like to remind everyone that your audition begins the second that you pull into the parking lot, and it doesn't end until you actually leave the studio, leave the lot, leave the space. You never know who could be listening to you.
Yeah, I mean, many productions actually specifically will have people planted to kind of monitor the room a little bit too. But don't let that freak you out. Really, what it's about is being respectful to your fellow, your coworkers, basically. What it's about is setting professionalism, being professional. And that's your chance to prepare to go into the room, which is where you really want to perform.
Right.
And so I think throwing away that time before really robs yourself of that time in the room.
Absolutely.
And so let's talk about once you get into the room. I think, especially given the lower volume of auditions people have in person, I think some people start to panic a little bit.
Right.
And I think it's really important that that time, if someone else has paid for a room and given you 6 minutes inside of it, that's a gift, right? Take that time.
Yeah.
That is your time. Make sure that don't go before you're ready. I mean, don't be ridiculous. Right. Don't eat up people's time, but own the space, right?
Yeah. Own the room. That's another term you'll hear. I can't agree with you more. That time, that space is yours. If you practice the audition sitting because the scene calls for it sitting, and you walk in the room and there is a camera set up and that there's a chair in the corner, but it's not in front of the camera, and you want to do your audition sitting, ask if you can sit, right?
Yeah. It drives me crazy, I'll be honest. When I would audition people and everyone would, can I sit? Would rather, can you not?
Yeah.
Can you just not sit?
They may tell you that you can't. But I say that as an example of, this is a collaboration.
Yeah, this is your space.
This is your time, your space. It is not, casting is not on a pedestal. They need your amazing performance to solve their problem just as much as you need the job. And so taking, there may be a little bit of banter at the beginning. Obviously keep that about the weather, about, something kind of innocuous.
Brief and inoffensive.
That's great. But after that, if you need 30 seconds to just look at your sides one more time, and if you need to turn around and step in the corner and take a breath before you start your audition, all of those things are the owning the room.
Yeah, and then specifically if it's a musical theater audition, you're going to want to speak to the accompanist. You're going to want to make sure your tempos are correct. If there's any tricky cuts in the music, if there's anything that might be difficult to follow, make sure you're on the same page. If something goes awry, stop and ask to start over. It is very important that you feel comfortable doing that. A lot of people start to feel like, well, it's spiraling out of control, it's getting away from me, but what can you do? Yeah. What you can do is stop and reset. Everyone's going to be fine with that. We want to make sure that you're giving a good audition, your audition. So don't feel like, oh no, things are going wrong and now I am stuck with this, right? And so speaking of things going wrong, what happens if I get there and I'm late?
Yeah. So hopefully if you are running late, you have safely pulled over for a second and texted or emailed or called your agent or manager to let them know that you are running late so that they can get in touch with casting on your behalf and let them know that you're running late. So that is the first thing. So hopefully casting already has the expectation that you're going to be a little bit behind. In the event that somehow you can't get in touch with someone or there isn't a way to safely pull over and communicate that, you definitely just want to not be bursting into the audition space or, office, freaking out, making a big scene. I think being professional, everybody understands. Obviously, you want to apologize, but you don't have to make a huge deal about it. Usually,
right,
they're often running late. You don't want to count on that, but most of the time, if it's 5-10 minutes, you can probably get away with it. The reason why you don't want to be late, as we've talked about in another video, is that time is quite literally money in the entertainment industry. And so anytime you're late, you're kind of signaling that you might also be late to set.
Right.
And so how you handle being late is just as important as not being late in the first place.
Yeah. I want to go back over what you said too about not bursting in and putting that anxiety out. Like if you're 5 minutes late, I would rather you be 5 minutes and 30 seconds late.
Right.
With that 30 seconds being comporting yourself outside and like making sure that like, okay, I'm breathing, I'm here. Like 30 seconds, 20 seconds additional is not gonna, you know what I mean? Like if you're already a little bit late, you can be a little bit more late just to make sure that, because what happens a lot of times is someone's late, that becomes what the audition is about. And I think it's really important that, again, you just like make sure that you're being professional. You make sure that, you know, you're respecting people's time the same way you want your time respected. And yeah, just don't make it about that.
Right.
Now there's in a bit of a hybrid. We're filming this in 2024. I believe it'll release in 2025. Bit of a hybrid model here. Called it might be called an EcoCast Live. It might be done over Zoom.
Yeah.
There are a few different forms it can take, but this is essentially a live audition done virtually.
Right.
And this is very much a whole new world. A lot of people are figuring out, and including the how do I handle myself in a virtual waiting room?
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, virtual waiting room, very similar to a regular waiting room.
Yeah.
And potentially, depending on if it's EcoCast Live, it's actually set up to show you kind of where you are next in the queue of who's waiting. You'll see how many other actors are ahead of you. It'll let you know when you're on deck to go into the room next. So EcoCast Live really truly is set up to mimic the live in-person scenario in a virtual environment. There's a great tutorial online that we'll post a link to,
right,
to what to expect out of an EcoCast Live, and that was published by Breakdown Services. So definitely if you get an EcoCast Live and you've never done one before, you're going to want to review that webinar so you know exactly what to expect. If it's over Zoom, they may be able to see the waiting room. They may have someone in the waiting room that's watching the waiting room.
Right.
These sessions in both scenarios are obviously being recorded. So again, your behavior not only in the audition itself and your performance in the audition itself, but everything else around that is being recorded potentially. And so if you're in the waiting room, you can have your camera off until they bring you in so that you're not in danger.
I actually recommend.
Yeah, you're not in
camera
danger.
Off and muted.
Muted, right? Of, your roommate walking in and not realizing that you're in an audition or you're in a waiting room or something like that, or a pet sort of interrupting you while you're in the waiting room. You want to be professional, but you also want to be ready to go when you get invited into that virtual audition space. The other thing you want to make sure of is that you've got your framing, and this is, I think, another term that you'll see come up all the time. It's what we were talking about a bit with the vertical versus horizontal, but also your actual, where you are showing up in the frame of the camera. A lot of times the camera on the device that you're zooming on is quite different than whatever you normally use for your self-tape setup. And you don't want to notice that your framing is off when the audition starts.
Right.
So practice, figure out where you're going to set that up. It's usually going to be a computer or your phone again. And if you don't have a tripod for your phone, what is that going to be sitting on during this live virtual audition? What does your background look like? Is your head hitting the top of the frame? Usually the shot is going to be something similar to what we've got here. And casting, I think, has gotten used to helping to instruct people in these scenarios, but all of the same rules apply, right? If you need a moment between when they ask you to slate and when you want to start the audition, ask for some time. Ask questions if you are, and we didn't really cover that before.
True.
But ask questions if you have questions about the material or questions about the character. Engage with casting. If you have an idea about a way to take the character that may be a little bit different, after you do the first take, ask them if you can get a take with your cool idea so that they can see your unique artistry that may be different than what everyone else is bringing.
But don't just make one up to make one up. It's got to be organic. It's got to make sense. And to your point earlier about the reason I think that like turning off your camera and turning off your sound when you're in the waiting room, or not your sound, but your mic, when you're in the waiting room, is Zooms are exhausting. They just are. You kind of have to be on all the time. Everything's very like, you have to be alert and up. Yeah. So that's why I think that that's a really nice time to kind of just let yourself chill and not feel like you have to be on in the same way. So that's why I really advocate for turning everything off. So whether an audition is in person or self-taped or, even an EcoCast Live or a Zoom, one thing they're going to ask you to do is slate.
Yeah.
And a slate is a very utilitarian thing that casting needs. Can you talk a little bit about what that might entail?
Sure. So most slates will be some really basic information. They're going to want you to say your name, your height quite often, and also where you were based and the location where you're filming if it's different than where you're based. If you're a youth client, they will also ask for your age if you are under 18. If you are an adult actor and you get slate instructions that ask you to slate your age, they have probably accidentally copy-pasted a youth slate instruction for that role. Do not answer the age question. You are legally not required to, so just skip over that if you are an adult actor.
If it is a teen role, you can say I'm over 18, but you do not actually have to.
Yeah, and you don't have to state, once you turn 18, you do not have to state your actual age because it doesn't matter. It only matters the age you can play. Yeah. A lot of times actors kind of get worried about the slate or think they have to do something extra in the slate or perform. Half the time, every casting director I've talked to, they are literally filling out a Google sheet or an Excel sheet with columns that have, actor name, location, height. So they're oftentimes not necessarily looking at the slate. But the reason why they need it is that they are going to put together a package of 6 to 10 auditions for each role to send to their producers or send to the network. And it's going to be one long tape most of the time. And so the slate actually is what goes in between everybody's separate audition for that same role. So that's why they want to have the same information for each one so that when their producers are watching, it's sort of, name, height, location, the audition, and then the next actor's audition plays with that slate in front of it.
Yeah, so it should go without saying, but if they have specific instructions for your slate, follow those instructions. If they don't, then I think name, where you're based, and representation is a good way to go. Do you prefer, without sans instructions, do you prefer slating in the front or slating in the back, what's called a tail slate?
Yeah, I mean, I think most auditions ask for the slate first, if they're not asking for it as a separate file. Tail slate can be cool, though, because it kind of makes, if they don't ask, it has them watch your audition first before they see your slate.
Yeah.
So if they don't have any instructions about separating files and, where they want the slate, it can be fun to put the tail slate because then the first thing they see of you is actually in character versus you slate.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think that I like a tail slate if they don't specify otherwise. I like a tail slate because you get right into the work, first of all. They're going to watch the first 5 seconds of you. They're not going to be like, oh, he's not even in LA. Yeah. But also, one thing I like is say there's an accent, you're doing that in Irish, and then we cut to the tail slate and there's your American, your normal accent. I think that's really fun. I think it's really cool.
I agree. So, yeah, it's like one of those, pro tip, bonus tip. If there's bonus tip, if there's no instructions, then maybe tail slate is a good idea. And another term, obviously.
And speaking of, sometimes they'll want a full body shot, a full body slate. There are a few, you can break the horizontal only rule, for instance. But what if you live alone? How are you going to film your full body slate? Can you talk a little bit about full body slates?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, if you live alone and you're, recording your audition with someone over Zoom, which is totally fine, like they're reading with you over Zoom or even over the phone on speaker and you've got your camera recording and so we're just hearing that reader.
We've all gotten real clever.
Yeah, exactly. And casting, as long as your performance is there and they can hear the other lines and they can see that you can interact with the other lines, they truly, truly are focused on your performance. If you are living alone, you're going to want to record your slate in the normal self-tape framing, looking straight into camera. That's another thing. Slates are always straight to camera. You're going to want to record that and name, height, location, whatever they're asking for in the instructions, and slate. And then find a full body photo of yourself. Even prepare ahead of time, and when a friend is over, have them snap a couple full body photos of you in an outfit that you audition with often or an outfit that you think you look good in. It doesn't matter if your full body matches the outfit from the audition. It really
probably won't.
It probably won't. But we'll put a link to this in the description below. You can actually edit that slate plus the full body shot in a side by side split screen, which kind of looks really cool and is elegant. And it's an easy way for you can reuse that same full body photo over and over again next to the video of you fulfilling the slate instructions that you will do with each audition.
And to add to that, I think a lot of my New York clients in particular, they don't have a lot of space. Yeah. They live in small apartments. It's okay if that's done outdoors. It's okay. I like your idea of having a few just sort of on hand for when you need them. Maybe have an upscale, a downscale, and you don't worry about the outfit or anything, but have something that shows your lines and something that is just kind of attractive.
Yeah.
So then cutting forward to the audition itself, you're going to be given almost always what are called sides. And so sides are specific parts of the script that are used for the audition. Mm-hmm. Now there are a lot of different forms the sides can take, but 9 times out of 10 these days, they are just scenes from the audition involving your character. Can you talk a little bit about sides?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if this is actually true or just apocryphal, but supposedly the term sides comes from in an ideal audition situation, you're supposed to be given 3 different scenes that show 3 different sides to the character.
Okay.
So that obviously these days is really only going to happen with a guest star, a series reg, where you're being given that much material. But ideally, in those scenarios, those scenes should be allowing you to show off sort of a couple of different emotional arcs for what's going on with the character. It's still called sides no matter what, and you might be given a set of sides with 1 line. So you're not going to be, you're not going to be given those 3 opportunities to kind of show off the range of the character. Usually those will be sent as they'll be attached to your audition either electronically through, again, the casting sites, or you'll be sent them in email from your reps. Obviously, you're going to want to download those immediately.
Right.
I can't tell you how many people who have asked for an extension on their audition haven't downloaded their sides out of EcoCast. The EcoCast expires, and now they've been granted the extension, but they don't have the sides.
Luckily, that has never happened to me.
It has happened to me more than once, and so it is an embarrassing thing to have to then tell your rep that you didn't download the sides right away when you got your audition. So yeah, definitely if your sides are only available through that casting site, download them the second that you accept the audition.
So what is your opinion on holding your sides during your audition? Because I have strong thoughts on this. I'm curious what you have to say.
Oh, I wonder if they're different than what I have to say. All right. This is going to be our first argument. I think if you need them to feel comfortable and it makes it so that you are going to perform the scene to your best ability, it is absolutely okay that you're holding the sides as long as they are not distracting from your performance. So, ideally, you don't want to be looking, if they cause you to look down constantly, that's not great. There is a trick to learning how to hold sides out of frame and look down while the other character is speaking for your next line, so that when you're performing your line, you're back up with the camera. And actors that are really good at this actually manage to make that almost look like a character choice, like they're looking down and thinking.
Sure.
You know, they're maybe actually holding their sides down.
That's what I'm doing, by the way, when I'm looking off.
Totally. You know, but I also find that a lot of time it's a crutch that actors don't need.
Yeah. And I think we should also point out that with the latest SAG negotiations, the rule was created that you do not, they have to say that you do not have to memorize your sides. Correct. Memorize your sides if it's at all possible. I understand sometimes you don't have enough time. Sometimes for whatever reason, it's just maybe it's a lot of lingo, a lot of medical terminology or something. I would highly encourage you to memorize your sides, just because it's so hard to act if you're reading. It's so difficult to kind of be in the page, not know what's coming, and kind of have to go back and forth. Now, what I was going to say about holding sides in particular is I used to work for an actress who made the observation that for her, she always liked to hold sides even if she was completely off book, because it reminded them it was an audition. I think there's something interesting about that. I'm not sure that I fully agree with it, but I like the psychology of it. So all that only really just to say, like, it doesn't really matter. The more important thing about holding sides or not holding sides, having sides or not having sides, is really just like, you don't want anything distracting you from being the character in the moment during the audition.
And I've actually heard casting directors in the room say that they get nervous when the actor isn't holding the sides. Yeah. Because they're concerned that the actor isn't fully memorized and then is therefore going to, if they make a mistake, gonna like freak out that they've made a mistake.
Yeah, I think it becomes an audition about the sides at that point. So I think that it's like being late. Like, you want to just let the audition be the audition. One additional thing I would like to say about sides is, earlier we said don't post your videos publicly. Do not post your sides. Don't post them. Don't post a screenshot. Don't post, just don't post them at all.
And again, same reason. This is not material that you own. Right. It is copywritten material. Sometimes millions of dollars have gone into creating the thing that you're holding in your hands. And you don't want to run the risk of ruining those millions of dollars. Yeah. Now, I will say, you may run into a scenario where that sort of protection against posting sides and sharing them, in my opinion, sort of has gone too far. There are a couple of companies that first will make you sign an NDA, which is fine. That's normal. But there's a couple
of self-destructing sides.
Yeah. Oh, I can't do it with the self-destructing
It's a
sides.
lot.
If I had a soapbox, because so you may encounter that you have to download your sides from a service that only lets you download them one time to one device, and that is the only device that you are allowed to access them on, which begs the question, how are you supposed to have a reader?
How do I have a reader?
I have never understood the answer to this.
How do I coach?
If you take a screenshot from that, it will self-destruct. If you try to forward or whatever, it will self-destruct. We're not fans of that. We do our best to... So I would say if you're in that scenario and you need creative ways to help get your reader the material they need, talk to your agent or manager, and we will help you figure out a way around that.
Yeah, we're not going to tell you in this video how to do it, how to get around those protections, because it is their right to protect their material. However, I think they do it at the cost of a good audition sometimes. And so it behooves them for you to have a good audition. So work collaboratively to make sure that you are as prepared as you can be, even if it means like, hey, these auditions, I need some way to like coach this or whatever. Just talk to your reps and they'll talk to casting and figure out a solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
But don't post your sides.
So one last thing, just to touch back on the memorization aspect of all of this. Again, do what works best for you as an actor. If you give a better performance when you're memorized, memorize. If you have a really hard time memorizing, you always have, and you need a lot of rehearsal and time with the sides to get memorized, and you've never been able to do it for an audition, don't worry about it. Hold your sides and get really good at that sort of performance where you actually are glancing down, but it's not impacting your performance. I think a cold read class is a really good way if you need to kind of brush up on that specific skill, because it is a skill you can learn.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to remember that auditioning really is the job. Yeah. If you book something, great. Obviously, that's the goal. Yeah. But the job really is auditioning. And so making sure that you audition as well as you can, whether that means memorizing or not memorizing, whether that means holding the script or not holding the script, do your job as effectively as you can do your job.
Absolutely.
Thankfully, because of the great advice we've given, everyone watching this video has received a callback.
Exactly.
Congratulations.
What is a callback?
So it used to be, it's called a callback because they are literally calling you back to audition again. So either it's going to be with the same material or often with new material. And usually there will be feedback. Sometimes there won't be. Sometimes you'll just be coming back to do it again or to do some new material. So let's talk a little bit about the various types of callbacks, if we will.
Sure.
So again, self-tape callback. Usually they're going to send new material because obviously why would you? It was the same material. You just send the same tape.
Right.
So there's going to be some new material and you're going to self-tape with that.
Yep. Or there will be a specific redirection from either casting or the director about something in your first tape that they want to see modulated, changed, or sort of finessed.
Yeah. I think that's the part of the self-tape process that is much more difficult than the live, because obviously they can just give a redirect in the room. And now there's all this lead up to it and all these steps, but it still does happen from time to time. And that's a really great opportunity to show that you take direction through a self-tape.
Yeah, which actually, we didn't really touch on this, but if you are given the opportunity to choose between a self-tape and a Zoom audition, we always recommend that you take the opportunity for that Zoom audition. It is the closest thing to being live in the room. You are going to get to meet and interact with casting, and you are going to be able to have that opportunity to have a redirect or show them an alternate version of the scene you prepared in a way that ensures that they're going to be present and watching it, which they may or may not have time for if you send an extra take that you weren't asked for in a self-tape scenario.
Yeah, funny you should mention Zoom, because that's another kind of callback. So a lot of times, even if it's a self-tape audition, the next level will be a Zoom callback. Zoom, obviously, the benefit being it's in real time. You can show that you take direction. You can actually meet people in a way that like self-tape you really can't. Yeah. So you can start to build some name recognition and some rapport. And then you may even get called back to be in the room.
Yeah. And one thing to kind of prepare for a Zoom callback is that there may often be a number of extra people in that on the other side of the screen that may never show their faces on video.
Yeah.
So it will be you and the casting director, and they will be reading with you, and you may see 3 or 4 more boxes on Zoom with people's names, or it might just have a logo from the company that's producing it, and you won't necessarily know who's behind that box. Don't let that throw you. That's normal. Focus on the casting director, focus on making that connection, focus on that, witty banter with them, either before or after, and it's your audience. Your audience has just gotten a little bigger for that Zoom callback.
Yeah, and that can happen in person too. Like in an in-person callback, there might be the ad executives might be there, or people from the company might be there, the client might be there. So yeah, that's just an extension of the same thing, especially on the commercial side. You might see a lot of that in the room. Especially on the theater side, you're going to see like now suddenly the resident director is there and the associate choreographer is there, and there's all these just like additional bodies, but it doesn't change the work. The work should still stay the same. So just keep that in mind. But since we're on the topic, do we want to talk about producer callbacks and director sessions?
Yeah. And hopefully this will all be communicated to you when you're moving through these processes. So you'll know if you're having a callback with casting and who's going to be in the room, or if it is actually a producer session. And now you're doing the same material, but, you know, the showrunner is going to be in there. Or like you said, the choreographer, the producers behind the show or on the commercial side, not just someone from the agency, but maybe the client. And again, that's another term. The client in the commercial world is the advertiser.
The product.
Whoever is representing the company that's paying for that ad. I think the best way of looking at all of these things is congratulations, your audience is getting bigger.
Yeah.
Right? So you as an actor, you know, you may have started this process as a self-tape. You're performing to your room by yourself with your friend who's reading with you over Zoom.
The stuffed animal for a sight line.
Exactly, or a post-it note. And now you have 15 people in the room watching that performance, maybe watching another additional scene. This is what you want. You want to keep growing your audience so that someday you're going to have all of America watching this episode of your latest TV show.
Yeah. And I think two things, well, something to take note of is in that session, let's say it's a producer session, let's say that there are 4 additional people there. Yeah. They may give you feedback. They may interact with you. They may give notes. They may not speak at all.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're going to set the tone, follow their lead, be cordial, be collegial. You know, if they want to have a conversation, show off your personality. But sometimes they, you know, don't want to be involved. Yeah. And that's okay too. That's, you know, that's something to take note. Just read the room.
Exactly. Expect everything and don't necessarily draw meaning from anything. Right. My dad is not in the entertainment industry at all. And when I started managing, he was asking me questions about sort of how this works. And he pointed out to me very astutely that every single audition, unless you are auditioning for the exact same show, for the exact same group of people, so same casting director, same writer,
director,
every audition is a one of one. It is unique. So you can't compare or draw rules across from one audition to another. You may have a great chat, banter with a showrunner in a producer session in one audition and absolutely think that you've won the room and booked the role, and it doesn't come through for you. And the one you book is going to be the one where nobody said anything to you and you were just talking to the casting director. So don't draw patterns from these things. Like you said, go in, be professional, be cordial. The casting director is your friend in these producer director sessions. They are your advocate. They have put themselves out there to bring you and a select few of number of actors in, and they are truly advocating. They want you to get hired because then their job is done.
Yeah, I think that's really important I think we'll state it again. If they put you in front of the people paying them, that's a win. That is a huge, huge win. Because that is their job, is to present good options. And so if you are one of those options, that means that they believe that you are representative of their work, of their taste. So congratulations. Now,
and make them look good. But also know that they are on your side, right? So they have prepped their bosses about you. They've told them how awesome your tape is. They may have seen the original tape, etc. So yeah, truly your advocates.
And assuming things go well in the callback, or sometimes even from the first call, you may get, so there are a lot of sort of different names that are kind of basically the same thing. It may be called a pin.
Yep.
It may be called a hold. It may be called an avail. That's a little different. And it may be called, if it's really old school, a watch and advise. Yes. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about pins, holds, and avail checks.
Lovely things, lovely terms. So let's talk about theatrically first. And so we mean film, television. not theater, but
Right.
film and television. Some of this applies to theater too. We're going to talk about commercials separately in a second. Theatrically, again, you could get a pin, you could have an avail check, and like you said, a watch and advise. All of these are typically the same thing. It means that you're in the mix. That's another one.
Oh, in the mix.
In the mix.
Yeah.
So,
That just means that you haven't been cut yet.
Yeah.
I mean, in the mix can mean a lot of different things.
Yes, but it can be part of those things too. So any of these terms mean that your tape was well received by casting, and they are likely doing something with it now. They're
Sending it to producers or,
Exactly. Sending it for someone else to take a look at. And so they want to know if you are truly going to be available to book that job. My casting friends will probably hate that I say this. In the theatrical world, it is not as strict as the commercial world when you accept an avail. If your agent comes and says, hey, we have an avail check for you, we have a pin for you, are you in town for these dates? And you say yes, those dates could be a month out.
Yeah.
So what is really going on there is we, as your reps, are agreeing that as of today, when we say, yes, you're available, you are available today. And if anything changes between today and whatever future date that they may come back to us, we are agreeing to update them.
Yeah.
Again, this is theatrically.
I also, there's a little bit of a nuance called a tech avail.
Yes.
Which is where you are available at that moment, but there's something likely to happen. Like maybe, for instance, you are pinned for something else. Or like there is some other activity that we don't necessarily need to tell them about, but we do need to say like it is tech avail, or technically he's available, but there are moving pieces.
Yeah, there might be something else going on. In the commercial world, if you accept an avail, that commercial casting director is going to expect that you are available to work that job when and if they come back to you to book you. So these time frames are much shorter on the commercial side usually. So these things move a bit faster, although TV can move pretty fast. Because they have to go to that producer director of the commercial and the client and get approval from the client, they want to make sure that they're getting approvals from the client on people who are truly available to shoot that commercial. They do not want to have to go back to the client and say, actually, that guy you really loved for your Budweiser commercial is now not available. That is not, like I said, not so strict in the theatrical world.
Yeah.
As long as your reps are effectively communicating that there's these moving pieces. So you always want to be completely 100% upfront with your reps about your true availability so that you don't run into a scenario where you've said you're available, especially in the commercial world, and then all of a sudden you're not going to be there to work.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, there is something called a check avail that's a little bit different than an avail. So a check avail is essentially before there's been a session, or maybe there won't even be, or they won't even read actors for a role. They'll just check to make sure that you're available. And the reason that they do that is primarily because they're going to take a list to the producers or to the director or to whomever, to the studio, the network, whoever, and they want to make sure that before they pitch those names, that those people are actually available for the project. They don't want to pitch, Brad Pitt and then find out, well, Brad Pitt's, in Ibiza for the next 6 months shooting this other movie. So that is really just, it's more of a procedural thing. And I think I get a lot of instances where there's an avail check and then people will be like, well, so am I still in the mix? Unless it's like, you were never really in the mix because there was no formal audition or anything. It was just, so a lot of times those dates, just take it with a grain of salt.
Right. And that's why in the theatrical world, these things aren't quite as strict, right? Because you can get avail checks on a number of projects and they may or may not even turn into an audition.
Yeah.
And a lot of times those are kind of for the offer only level actors too, right?
Yeah.
That once you get to that place, another term here, offer only, which means that you do not audition anymore. You're just going to be on these lists and people are going to be checking your avails with your reps and then pitching you, and then hopefully an offer will come in.
Yeah. So Jess, We've talked about theater auditions. We've talked about commercial auditions. We've talked about television. We've even talked about film auditions. But one thing we haven't talked about is a world I really know very little about. I work at an agency where we have a great voiceover division, and I see them listening to a ton of auditions. Can you talk a little bit about the voiceover audition process?
So voiceover auditioning is, again, similar to everything else. You're going to be sent the audition, all the information about the character, but there are a couple key things that are very different. First of all, 99% of the time, they just want an audio file. You do not need to put yourself on camera. They do not want to see you on camera. They don't need it because this is a voiceover job. So the file that you're going to be sending through as the audition is going to be an MP3 file. It's just audio. Much smaller file, much easier to record. Most smartphones these days have some kind of voice memo app. Again, if you're just starting out, recording on your phone, interestingly, in your closet is a great way to do that because your clothes are going to dampen everything. Squeeze on in there, have a little, I've seen actors with like tape up their sides for the VO audition, have a little like LED light that shines on them, and they can shut the closet door and sneak in there and record that audition in there on their phone. So, and then obviously all the way up to getting professional equipment and editing software and all of that. A lot of times voiceover auditions will ask you to slate, just like everything else. In voiceover, the slate usually is just your name. So unless they ask you for something else, slate your name. Practice saying your name, just your name, where it doesn't sound like a question. It's so funny how hard that skill is, but you know, you want to make sure, if I were doing it, I would say Jess Canty, and then I would start my voiceover audition. Obviously, you're going to want to leave a little.
If it was me, I would say Anthony.
Yeah, exactly. But it's so funny how easy that it can sound like a question. So,
oh, did mine sound like a question?
No, I don't know, not at all. Oftentimes, they do not want a reader. So they only want your side of the auditions, your side of the sides. And they will have instructions about if they want multiple takes. Quite often, the default is if you're going to send multiple takes, that's going to be a different file. There's something called wild takes or wild lines. They may want you to do the button, which is the very last tag. These are in voiceover commercials, but the last part of the scene is usually a button or a tag. So they may say that they want the entire thing read all the way through once and 3 options on the tag or 3 options on the button. They just want different delivery, different intonation on there. Sometimes they will ask you to improv. So you'll do a regular take with what's written and then an improv take. So again, you just want to follow all the instructions. But all of this is going to be audio only. That is the biggest thing about these auditions. And the fact that you do not need a reader,
right,
which is very different.
Yeah. So congratulations. You have done such a great job. They want to book you. Mm-hmm. We'll do a whole other video about what happens then and the terminology that happens once you're booked. But let's just talk about booking.
Yeah.
So if someone sends an offer, I think there are a few things to note. Number one, it is literally an offer, which means that you can negotiate.
Yeah.
You might not get any traction on a negotiation, but it is always okay to ask questions, to get clarification before accepting a job, or, you know, asking for whatever you need before accepting a job. If you do accept the job, you have accepted the job. I think that's important to state. Would you agree?
Yeah. You are committing to doing this job for these dates that are in that offer, for the terms that are in the offer. So I can't stress enough, you know, this business is built on negotiation. It is literally what this lovely man does day in and day out. He is an expert at it. And our job is to not let production get away with having you accept that offer as is.
Right. I always want some win.
I want something. Yeah. I want a name for that character.
Yeah.
It's a co-star and it's the building manager, right? The biggest thing, and we'll talk more in depth about this in another video, do not feel the pressure to accept the offer right away. Let your team negotiate on your behalf.
Yeah, there's no real advantage to closing in 40 minutes. You know what I mean? There is time built in for negotiation. It is fine. You're not going to lose the job.
That's super
by asking for, whatever. It doesn't even have to be more money. It can be any of a number of things, but asking questions is not going to result in losing the job. If it does, I would question whether that was a job you wanted to begin with.
Exactly.
But anyway, just something to keep in note. And we'll talk more about once you book the job in a subsequent video. But I do want to talk about, we've talked about auditions in particular. There is another format by which you may have an interaction with a casting director, with a producer, with someone, and that's a general meeting.
Yeah.
Now, they don't happen as frequently as they used to, but they do still happen fairly regularly, more regularly than I think a lot of people realize. Yeah. Can we talk about sort of like, let's say that your agent calls you and says, hey, great news, I got you a general with the head of casting at ABC, and now you're like, what do I do? What do I prepare? How do I you have a million questions running through your head. So let's answer a few of them. Let's talk about what a general meeting is and what it is not specifically.
Yeah. So in general, a general meeting is not an audition.
At all, I would say.
You are not going to be coming in having prepared a specific character, specific sides. This is really about casting, if it's in general with casting, or if it's a general with a director or a producer that your rep thinks that you guys would get along well, you both like the same kind of movies. A lot of times this will happen with management companies in particular. If they have a literary division and a talent division, they want to match their clients together. They know they have a writer that is looking to develop for an actor. They have an actor that doesn't write, and they will try to pair you. And so they'll set up a general meeting for the two of you. It's kind of like a date. It's kind of like a first date. And so much of this business, we talk about this all the time, can be mapped onto relationships and dating.
Right.
How would you comport yourself on a first date, right? You would dress nicely. You would share interesting things about yourself without oversharing. You would be excited to be there. You would be engaged with the person that you're meeting with and ask questions about them, ask what they love about the business, ask what they love about their job. You are trying to forge what hopefully is going to become the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Yeah.
And this is your opportunity to do so. So, brush up on, if it's the head of casting at ABC, brush up on the shows that they've recently cast and are on their particular credit list. A lot of studios actually have multiple heads of casting for different divisions. So, do your research. Make sure you've watched their shows. If it's a director that you're meeting with, make sure you've watched their films and any episodes of TV that they've directed specifically. If it's a producer, know their filmography so that you can go in there authentically talking about what of this person's work has excited you.
Yeah. And the other thing I would strongly encourage you to do is absolutely prepare with the work, but also prepare with not work. I find that the best general meetings, you frequently don't talk about work at all.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think knowing something about them or just being curious, being genuinely curious is always a good quality.
Yeah.
And so to go in, understanding we're going to talk about work, but also we're going to talk about each other and ourselves, and be really, really, I want you to commit to asking questions and learning about them. People love talking about themselves. And, we'll talk more about proper networking, later on in another video, but this is a really good opportunity, especially when you're in the world where people want to take generals with you. That's a really cool place to be. And I would just say, take advantage, but also just really appreciate what's going on, because not everyone gets to that level.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I would say is know who you are as a performer. And this goes for all the time. You might be out networking and someone says, well, what kind of acting do you do? You should be able to answer that question specifically. You should be able to talk about what turns you on as a performer, what kind of work. you want to be doing, and hopefully it aligns with this person that you're meeting with. You can do this by just being authentically passionate about whatever aspect of the business you ideally want to work in. If you are, if we're waving the magic Hollywood wand and you get to choose the show you want to be on for the next, 10 years, or the kind of show you want to be on for the next 10 years, talk about those things that turn you on creatively. If they're a match with this person across the table, great. If they're not, no big deal. You've made another connection, and we'll find you another general where maybe it's a better match.
Yeah. So listen, we've been talking a long time. This turned into a really lengthy one, but I thought it was full of really good information. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm Anthony Boyer. This is Jess Canty. Leave a comment below. Tell us, if you have any thoughts about auditioning. Do you like to memorize? Do you like to not memorize? Do you like to hold your script? Do you like to not hold your script? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.
If you are living alone, you're going to want to do the slate instructions, the part of the slate, name, height, all of that in your normal self-tape. If you are living alone, you are going to want to do the slate instructions in the normal self-tape door.
If you are living alone.
Take 3.